This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new episode of Behind the Headlines. I'm Maura Donnelly, and I'm very happy to have with me today my co-host. Charlie's on assignment, so Jerry is pinch hitting today. Jerry is an associate of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. I look forward to it, and with Madam Treasurer, we'll learn a lot.
Yes, we will, and you already introduced her. So we're very, very pleased to have with us today Pennsylvania's State Treasurer, Stacey Garrity. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you again, Maura and Jerry.
Well, we'd like to start, I know you probably get tired talking about yourself, but we would like to know, for our viewers, your background, because it's very amazing and we'd like to share it with everybody.
Oh, well, thank you. So I'm from Bradford County, and I like to joke that in Bradford County there are more cows than people, but it's very rural Pennsylvania in northern tier. And up until the day I took office, so January 19th, just a little over a year ago, I worked 34 years in the private sector at Global Tungsten and Powders, which is the largest tungsten smelter in the Western world. Worked my way up to become one of two female vice presidents, but was managing director at our facility in the Czech Republic, have been to almost every European country, China, Japan, Moscow, India, Russia, you name it.
Wow.
Yes. And additionally, I spent 30 years in the Army Reserves.
There we go.
Yes. Yes. And the only reason I ran for office was I hit that thing called your mandatory retirement date. So after 30 years, where basically you have to retire. And so I wanted to serve again. But I did have 3 combat deployments, all to Iraq. So now I'm going to age myself, because the first one was Desert Storm in '91. Then 2003, 2004, and the last one, 2008, 2009, where I was acting battalion commander at Camp Bucca, which is in southern Iraq. And our mission was to provide care and custody for 7,000 detainees. I had 1,200 soldiers under my command. And we were the first internment facility to have 0 escape attempts and 0 abuse allegations.
Oh,
But,
wow.
but I always say that, if I hadn't hit my mandatory retirement date, I would still be serving in the military, because serving our country was and still is the honor of my lifetime.
Well, thank you very much for your service,
My
both
honor.
to the United States and to Pennsylvania now. A
Yes.
different kind of service, but
Yes.
nonetheless very important. But you have some interesting programs going on. You have a lot going on. But the one I want to ask you some questions about today is called Keystone Saves. And that's a retirement plan for people who don't have retirement plans. So,
Exactly.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that and what brought it about. Why are you, the big proponent of this program at this point?
Okay, so as you said, Keystone Saves is a retirement program, and it's for people that do not have access to a retirement, any kind of retirement program through their employer. And this impacts over 2 million Pennsylvanians, so that's over 40% of our workforce.
Oh.
And so, they call it the silver tsunami. And so it's really going to hit us. And what these unprepared retirees are going to do, it's going to cost us $14.5 billion in increased state social services over the next 15 years, and additionally reduce tax collections of about $1.5 billion, and that's because of reduced consumer spending. So these are people, I like to say, they're my neighbors in Bradford County. They're my family members. These are people like your hairstylists, the people that work in our restaurants. And so why wait? Why not address it? So, I think it's an absolute win-win-win, because it's going to help taxpayers. Okay. It's going to help employees, because if we empower them to save, they're going to be less reliant on state social services when they do retire. And it helps employers, because, I traveled all 67 counties this past year, and I've talked to hundreds of small businesses, and they all say, yes, we would love to offer something for our employees, but we just don't have the bandwidth to do it.
That's very helpful, because with all the changes that the employers have had over these last couple of years, on top of what happened with the shifting of jobs overseas and now bringing them back, there needs to be a lot of changes, and this is a great one, so thank you very much for doing this. And with this, how did you come up with the idea to do this, and are other states doing this as well?
Yes, so there are 3 states that have active plans, and that would be California, Illinois, and Oregon. And then there are 7 additional states that have enacted legislation. So it's not just a problem in Pennsylvania, it's a problem across the nation. We just, don't save enough. And it had been floated around in the last administration, and I think when the pandemic hit, it really highlighted, the lack of savings. And I think that, we should do whatever we can to help our hardworking Pennsylvanians.
So unfortunately, you can't just wave a magic wand and put this into place, right?
No. Has to be legislated.
Yeah, of course. So tell us a little bit about where this proposal and this plan stands in the process of getting it to Pennsylvanians.
Yes, so the prime sponsor is Representative Tracy Pennycook, and Mike Driscoll is the co-sponsor. And so right now we have a co-sponsor memo. There are over 50 co-sponsors, so it's very bipartisan, I have to say. And right now they're working on the bill. It's in the LRB process, and so we expect it to drop any day now.
Great. And so what are you anticipating as a timeline for this? When do you think this, if all goes well?
So I like to say that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So now it's going to be our job at Treasury, along with the representatives, to go build a lot of support. So right now it does enjoy a lot of support. So there's AARP, there's Pew, of course. There's a number of chambers. Let's see, I have a list. There's the United Way of Pennsylvania supports it.
Great.
The Sustainable Agriculture folks, Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs, Cross State Credit Union Association, and there are a lot of other organizations that support it. And so we just are going to build that broad coalition around it, and then get more people on board.
So you have a couple of years, right?
We do.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody isn't trying to get to you now, but that we have to get through this process before it can go into place.
But still, the sooner the better. So if the viewers contact all their legislators and senators, that would be a good idea to make sure that there's an interest out there, especially with the smaller employers that can't afford to have a retirement program for the people, and that this is something that will really help with what we need greatly is financial literacy, and working in the schools with junior achievement and others. This will be another advocate, I'm sure. Junior achievement would be one, right up there. And so with that, what do you see as the hurdles, without doing it like in June? Just the fact that it's new?
Well, it's new, right? And so we wrote it to be the most business-friendly program so far in the nation. And so what we want to do is, so it'll be a 4-year phase-in period. So the first 2 years, once it's legislated, we'll put out an RFP for a private sector partner. So this will be run like a private-public partnership.
Someone to manage the fund.
Exactly,
Okay.
just like we do the PA 529 College and Career Savings Plan that everybody loves. It's been around for 30 years. Okay, and so during that time, we'll probably have a pilot. And then it'll be another 2 years to phase in. And so we'll start with the largest employers, the employers that have a payroll process already, and then we'll do the smallest employers last. So it's really, it's very methodical. We want to work with employers because we know they're the good guys.
Is there a proposal, or similar proposal, or some kind of proposal like this on the federal level?
I am so glad you brought that up.
Yeah,
Yes.
I thought I read something. How does that impact what you're doing?
Yes. So in the previous reconciliation bill, when they were looking at that $3.5 trillion federal spending plan, they had a federal auto IRA plan in here. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, it was a bit onerous, not good for Pennsylvania. So it had very severe penalties on employers if they didn't comply. And it was $10 per employee per day, capped at $500,000. So very onerous, and also it had to be up and running in a year. So it was going to be January 1st, 2023. Now the only good thing about the federal program is if you have a state plan, then it's grandfathered in. So Jerry, when you say the sooner the better, that's absolutely true. So this gives Pennsylvania the time to put together a plan that's right for Pennsylvania, that works for Pennsylvania, not the federal plan that's just very onerous, and it would hurt our small businesses.
Any feedback from the private sector? IRAs or funds on this? Are they for it, against it?
It's interesting because BNY Mellon actually operates in this state, and they do they do work with a couple of the states that I know of, and so they're huge advocates of this.
Oh, good. That's
Yes.
great news.
Yeah, it is good news.
Are there other things that you think that our viewers should know?
Let's say, oh yeah, some people say, okay, will this hurt the private market? And so Pew has looked into this, they've done some research, and the evidence is no. In fact, on the contrary, the data found that in states with similar programs, employers actually, they opted in at the same rate, nobody got out and joined a state plan, and in fact, it encouraged employers, if they started with the state, a lot of them moved and set up their own.
Are these plans, will our plans be portable?
Yes, they're portable.
Oh, that's...
And that's a great thing, so it follows you from job to job
Right.
to job. And we also put in a provision in the bill that they can take it out for emergency savings. Because these people that don't have money to retire, they also don't have any emergency savings.
Well, thank you. I think we squeezed in a lot of information, but
We
we'll
did.
definitely be following you and have you back so we can talk about it
Okay.
another time.
Perfect.
Stay tuned for another segment of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back. On this segment, Jerry and I are going to get to talk politics. I'm
Wonderful.
very excited about that.
And we have an expert here.
We do. We have one of the best people in Pennsylvania to talk politics with us. We'd like to welcome Charles Mcelwee, brand new to the show. He is the editor of Real Clear Politics, Pennsylvania Medium. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be, well, there's a lot going on, so we should just get right to it. Who's going to be our next governor?
You tell me. That remains. We have no idea, of course. It's a very contested year. Pennsylvania is the battleground of all battlegrounds when it comes to national electoral politics. And it's really hard to predict these days because Pennsylvania really is undergoing this political realignment. So on the Republican side, we have an extremely crowded field. And then on the Democratic side, there's Josh Shapiro, the Attorney General. And really, it's just a matter of looking at that map of Pennsylvania and who has the advantage. On the Republican side, of course, everyone is gunning for Donald Trump's endorsement, and it remains to be seen how that will play out and how effective that will actually be in the primary, although all signs indicate that it would be crucial to whoever prevails on the presently scheduled primary date of May 17th, possibly subject to change. And they will face Shapiro, who seems to be really determined to win. So he may be running as almost like a centrist just to look at the Pennsylvania political map and play it to his advantage. But look, Democrats face this reality that in this present time, Republicans have narrowed the voter registration advantage that Democrats have held for many years. So that in 2020, Democrats had about 800,000 voter registration advantage. It's down to 592,000, which was unthinkable even during Obama's presidency. And that's driven in large part by regions like northeastern Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania, working class voters who once found political refuge in the Democratic Party. That party no longer speaks to their concerns. So Shapiro in this coming year, while he has that suburban advantage in greater Philadelphia, former Republicans who are now Democrat, he must go out and across the state and campaign to face the reality that he'll be campaigning in towns where the Democratic Party was once the stronghold, and that's no longer the case.
And you can't campaign against no one. And so the
Yeah.
Republicans having this wide open field from all across Pennsylvania will certainly keep the interest up, all the way through the primary.
Exactly. But whoever prevails, I mean, they have a lot to work with because Shapiro is the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth. And let's face it, I mean, our major cities, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, have been dealing with a public safety crisis. So that's why you see a candidate like Jay Corman, President Pro Tem, calling for Larry Krasner's impeachment, the district attorney of Philadelphia, because that city is grappling with record homicide rates and the reality that these cities are dangerous. So it'll be really interesting to see what will Shapiro do in the coming months. Will he take the Rizzo path and become suddenly pro-law and order to try to win back suburban voters who may be growing disillusioned on their end with the Democratic Party's position on law enforcement?
Or as Charlie Giroux pointed out, he should be resigning as the chief law enforcement officer, since he's running for a higher office.
Yes, Charlie has noted that, and Charlie is a native of Philadelphia. Of course, he's in South Central Pennsylvania now, but he is an example of a candidate who has an acute understanding of the dynamics of Philadelphia and how the city is dangerously repeating history when it comes to what happened in the late 80s, early 90s. You could argue that's worse today with the realities of the pandemic era.
Much worse.
So there have been straw polls and different caucuses and state committee meetings. I mean, and every single one of them has come out with different people bubbling to the top so far. It's kind of fascinating to see when we talk about we don't know what's going to happen. But how do you see this playing out over the next couple of months? Do you think there will become a front runner on the Republican side for governor, or do you think it's going to come right down to the primary?
Well, it seems to be a fundraising game too. I mean, we're seeing fundraising levels that are unthinkable at this stage of any primary. I mean, we think back to McGinty and Toomey in 2016. That was considered the record fundraising year, the year that money was spent at levels that we could never fathom. And we're already on pace to surpass that in 2022, just with between the governor's race and the Senate race. But it's very hard to predict because you have a candidate like Dave White from Delaware County, a union guy, was a Republican councilman on the county council. That courthouse, of course, was Republican for more than a century, became Democrat during the Trump era. But White has performed well in some of those committee-level endorsements. And then, of course, you have Lou Barletta, who was one of the first 3 members of Congress to endorse Trump in 2016 and really was ahead of his time in the sense of he was mayor of Hazleton and had understood that city was a microcosm of many of the issues that are of great concern to working-class voters, whether they're Democrat or Republican. Of course, and
the open border, the southern border.
Well, so in 2006, Barletta introduced the illegal immigration ordinance in the city of Hazleton. That ultimately went to the U.S. Supreme Court and was struck down. But yes, I mean, that has been a city that has faced significant demographic, economic, and cultural change in the past 20 years. My family is from Hazleton. And Barletta was mayor during that period, and then that ultimately led to him going to Congress in 2010. So that populist strand that has become so popular among so many Pennsylvania voters, yes, Barletta had an understanding of that when he was mayor of a northeastern Pennsylvania city.
So to sum up, we have no idea. Yes. So let's talk about the U.S. Senate. Do we have any idea there what's going to happen?
That's also confusing because, of course, you have Dr. Oz and David McCormick. And they appear to be, it's a crowded field on the Republican side as well, but they appear to be the front runners at this time. With McCormick, he was the former head of Bridgewater, the world's largest hedge fund.
He just came out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Oz, he has suburban Philadelphia connections, but he kind of came out of nowhere too. And you read these articles about carpetbaggers that they're not really from Pennsylvania, but I think that is inconsequential in a state like Pennsylvania. I mean, let's look at our past successful office holders. Arlen Specter was from Russell, Kansas, same hometown as Bob Dole. Ed Rendell grew up in New York City. Even John Hines, most iconic Pennsylvania name imaginable, actually grew up in San Francisco. So I don't think that would necessarily be an issue. And McCormick is actually has deep roots in Pennsylvania. His father was president of Bloomsburg University and the first chairman of the state system of higher education under Thornburg.
Carla Sands.
And then Carla Sands grew up on the West Shore of Harrisburg. So she, of course, she has been out of state for years too. But so, I mean, even Pat Toomey grew up in Rhode Island. So I don't think that will be an issue. Again, I think it will be a fundraising game and, of course, Trump's endorsement. So on the McCormick side, he's hired a lot of Trump alums, from Hope Hicks to Stephen Miller, hoping that hiring those top people from the Trump era will get Trump's endorsement. And then, of course, Dr. Oz, it's actually Sean Hannity who is gunning for Trump to endorse him. And that's where, you know, Hannity's show has become a 9 p.m. platform for Oz to convey his message.
And he gave himself a big loan. Dr. Oz did.
Huge loan, and then a loan with the help of his wife's family, which has a major international company in suburban Philadelphia with vegetation maintenance. So, and Dr. Oz, I mean, he's really pushing hard on the pandemic era in Pennsylvania and how devastating it has been. McCormick is pushing for experience, his understanding of policy issues, and basically his argument that he's prepared for the job. And then amid all this, there's a fight over China because Bridgewater has major investments in China. And of course, Pennsylvania is yet another example, especially those small to mid-sized counties like Luzerne or Lackawanna. In the past 20 years, they have been devastated in terms of manufacturing jobs going overseas to China following China's entrance to the WTO in 2001. So it'll be interesting to see.
One you haven't talked about yet is the one, and you know, we look at Pennsylvania as being, if we were in Europe, we'd probably be 14 different countries, and that with the 67 counties, and you know, having people that have gone to all of them, our former lieutenant governor candidate, who's been doing very well. You know, we getting you know, the rank and file, you know, Republican state committee people, you know, votes, you know, is also one you haven't, you know, talked about yet. And, you know, when he was trying to help all the small businesses, you know, during the pandemic, I think it, you know, it did him very, very well. He went to, from Berks County, but also went to Lancaster Country Day School as well. And so what do you think of his chances?
Jeff Bartos. So you're right. He had a nonprofit. I believe it became affiliated with Barstool Sports, and he does seem to have an acute understanding of the map. This is a very culturally fractious state. No region is similar to the other. People who live in South Central Pennsylvania have nothing in common with people from Northeastern Pennsylvania. And Bartos has been campaigning across all 67 counties. The issue, of course, is in 2018 he ran with Scott Wagner. They did lose to Wolf. Wolf was reelected, but look, I mean, Wolf's second term, his popularity is plummeting, and he's almost in this gaslighting stage where we almost pretend that the pandemic policies which he enacted through gubernatorial emergency powers, like we're supposed to have amnesia, but they were devastating. And Bartos, as a small businessman, and as somebody who worked with small business people across the Commonwealth during COVID, yes, has an understanding that people are still very angry and disillusioned over what happened in the past 2 years, from schools to shuttered businesses.
I know you have a particular interest in some things that are happening in the Lehigh Valley. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I have a feature story in the current winter issue of City Journal, an urban policy magazine published by the Manhattan Institute, called The Supply Chain Empire. And the story focuses on the Lehigh Valley's dramatic economic growth. It's one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing region economically in the United States, thanks in large part to the warehousing and logistics industry. It leads the globe in industrial facility growth and now has a $43 billion GDP. It surpasses Alaska, Vermont. The place is
right here in Pennsylvania.
Right here in Pennsylvania.
Just the Lehigh Valley.
Just the Lehigh Valley.
Wow.
An economic powerhouse. And it's all due to warehousing growth. So for perspective, 11,000 people in that region are employed in the warehousing and transportation industries, which is equal to the same number that was employed by Bethlehem Steel right after World War II. It's fascinating, but the challenge now is developers are scavenging for lands. So there's now this bipartisan consensus among Republican and Democratic township officials that there needs to be a fix to Pennsylvania's municipal code in the sense of creating policies that result in balanced development, that it's actually getting out of control. It's a fascinating story because the Lehigh Valley was associated at one point with economic decline, especially by the mid-90s when Bethlehem Steel closed. And today it's a completely different story.
So does that explain the traffic going through there? Is that why it's
Right, so the reason that
always
trucks
insane?
outnumber cars on
Yeah.
Route 78 and 22 is because of that
Keystone
industry.
State, right.
Yeah.
And another factor, I think, too, with 9/11, we ended up putting in a lot of infrastructure into broadband, whatever, to have the Wall Street West, so that if there was another attack, then the stock market could operate, in the region just above the Lehigh Valley. And so that's another good point, I think, too, that helped, besides us being the Keystone State.
You're absolutely right, because, and another example is actually Hurricane Sandy. That completely disrupted Metro New York's supply chains in 2012. So at that point, following that devastation, a lot of industrial developers looked to the Lehigh Valley to place warehouses there instead. And now here you have this region supplying goods to 100 million people within one truck shift.
Wow. Are they doing any server farms? It would make sense. I know a lot of server farms were disrupted at a recent hurricane flooding.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it makes sense to move them. If they haven't done it, they should.
They should.
Yeah.
The Lehigh Valley is becoming the go-to destination for everything these days, and including the urban exodus from Metro New York. People who are dealing with quality of life issues in North Jersey, the punishing taxes, or if you're living in Manhattan and you're dealing with the rising crime and just the reality that you're now a remote worker, the Lehigh Valley has become the destination even for young professionals.
Lower personal income tax, that's all I'm saying. We want to thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
We
you.
covered a
Thank
lot of
you.
material. We'll just have to stay tuned on our big races here in Pennsylvania, but thank you for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Join us next time on a new episode of Behind the Headlines.